first-time cartel kingpin El Mencho tonight is a $15 million man. That is
Two infamous cartel kingpins facing very different realities right now. And the other, the subject of a manhunt by the federal government, now with a $15 million reward.
Behind the vibrant streets of Mexico, a dark empire thrives, built on violence, bloodshed, and the ruthless pursuit of power. The Jalisco New Generation Cartel, led by the infamous El Mencho. The ruthless leader of the Jalisco New Generation Cartel, also known as the CJNG, has become infamous for his brutal leadership, pushing the cartel to dominate global drug trade routes. All this wealth and power is finally coming to a head. Ever since he came into conflict with the Mexican Secretariat de la Defensa Nacional, or SEDENA, the Department of Defense of Mexico has been trying to crack down and obliterate El Mencho and his many military assets. However, before we discuss how these events went down, let's introduce the man and his drug empire. Before he became the feared kingpin of the CJNG, El Mencho was just a poor, hungry boy, destined for a life of struggle but driven by an unquenchable thirst for power and revenge. In July 1964, in the rural community of Culotitlan in Aguililla, Michoacán, Mexico, a young Ruben Acerguera Cervantes was the name that he was often attributed to. However, his name changes. Because of poverty, Ruben dropped out of school and had to take up small-time work for the local drug cartel, doing work like drug running or acting as security for fruit plantations. The police would arrest him several times. However, he would eventually go to America, where he continued to do much of the same. The U.S. government would deport him back to Mexico, yet this would not dissuade his ambitions. After being deported to Mexico in the early 1990s, he used this setback to fuel his rise through the ranks of organized crime. He would start as a simple drug mule working for the Milenio Cartel. He had been a resourceful man who knew how to get things done, and inevitably he found himself to be a top dog. Following the arrest and death of his bosses, he would have taken things into his own hands. Because of this, he would set up the CJNG and would poach many members from the Milenio Cartel and use this to kickstart his empire. Under the leadership of El Mencho, we would see the CJNG quickly expand its operations, finding itself becoming one of the largest and most powerful cartels in Mexico. And to do this, Mencho would employ violence and deceit, often used tactics like kidnapping high-profile targets in government or competing cartels, and he would even attack rival cartels and even the Mexican security force. However, all of this would call El Mech's gang to the government's attention. This would cause a manhunt with $15 million for his head. The Mexican government can't see all this and remain silent in the face of all this crime and violence. So, they would try to arrest El Mencho by first limiting the resources and money that they had. One of Mencho's biggest and most notable resources are his heavily armed militiamen and the loyal cartel members who will lie down their lives for the future of the cartel. SEDENA would mobilize to hunt down the CJNG and dismantle their operations with astounding force. They destroyed and reclaimed many clandestine airstrips and other assets for the CJNG. The streets of Mexico would be spattered red from blood, the sound of gunfire ricocheting off the walls. Sharp metallic smells and gunpowder linger around a mass of dead criminals. Armed SEDENA officers pushed CJNG members out of hiding, leaving a gruesome trail in its wake. CJNG were armed, but in the face of greater power and more vicious killers, they were foxes meeting the wrath of a hound. These conflicts would weaken the CJNG and its operations for years and would leave lasting scars on the surviving members of the cartel. The U.S. government's DEA, Drug Enforcement Agency, collaborated with SEDENA to dismantle the CJNG and share information. In the DEA's efforts, they could make over 600 arrests, 350 indictments, and the seizure of a significant amount of money, drugs, and cartel assets. With operations spanning the globe, the CJNG collaborates with other criminal organizations to trade drugs and weapons. The DEA quickly targeted their international networks, contributing to global efforts to dismantle the cartel. This would make life for the CJNG much harder, and it would further President Richard Nixon's war on drugs. The U.S. Departments of Justice, Treasury, and State have all announced that they would work with the DEA to sniff out the CJNG and tear it apart. This would include unsealing indictments, approving rewards, and designating CJNG leaders under the Kingpin Act. The motive for this operation had been made open. It's about tackling the drug problems in Mexico. Additionally, it also doubles as an international public relations campaign. The media have often slandered Mexico as being a place filled with cartels and violent gangs, regardless of how true this is. This is bad press for the Mexican government. By actively fighting against the cartels, the Mexican government can rehabilitate its image by showing off how tough on crime it truly is, and how it won't relate to cartels. Besides this, collaborating with the DEA could also potentially help the strained relationship between the USA and Mexico. However, the conflict between the CJNG and SEDENA has weakened the CJNG and its operations. This resulted in the cartel growing significantly weaker, and many other cartels have tried to swoop in to fill the market. The CJNG is still active. More importantly, the CJNG's leader, Mencho, is still at large. This ongoing conflict underscores the complexities of combating organized crime. Whilst substantial progress has been made in eradicating the gang, they are like cockroaches under the heel of the law. And much like when exterminating cockroaches stomping isn't enough, one must suffocate them or get rid of the rot that bred them. Ultimately, the war against the CJNG symbolizes the global fight against drug trafficking and organized crime, emphasizing the need for international cooperation and strategic enforcement. As SEDENA and its allies continue their efforts, as the battle against CJNG wages on, the question remains: can governments dismantle these powerful empires without addressing the roots of their creation?